Great. I want to thank everyone for coming out. This is the second in a series of 9 webinars. It's called the Back to Black series. Real quickly, I'm joined today by Travis Carson and Tony Cooper. You guys want to say hello quick?
Hi, everybody. Travis Carson
Hey,
here.
everyone. Tony Cooper. You're all doing great.
Excellent.
Thanks for coming.
The idea around this series of 9 webinars is around the theme of back to black, getting back to profitability, taking care of employees and customers in a post-corona world. And so a little bit of the inspiration, I want to tell a little of the story of AC/DC and how they inspired this. And I have to take you back all the way back to 1973, when Angus Young, 18 years old, partners with his brother Malcolm, who's just 20 at the time, to start a rock and roll band in Australia. And just 1 year into forming the band, they needed a new lead singer. And they ended up connecting with a fellow Scot that had emigrated to Australia. When I say Scottish, Bon Scott, in 1974. And he became the lead singer and lyricist for the band. And just 1 year later, they released their first album called High Voltage. And they were just on their way. And over the next 5-6 years, they would release another 5 albums and be on their way to becoming one of the greatest rock and roll bands. And in 1980, they were just finishing the Highway to Hell tour. They happened to be in England, and Bon, who is a notorious partier, went out for a huge night on the town and unfortunately drank so much that he became unconscious. One of the people that was with him decided to put him in the back of a car so he could kind of sleep it off. And unfortunately, during the night, while he was unconscious, he vomited and then aspirated and tragically. So if you can imagine, this is, this band's now been together for over 5 years. To lose their lead singer, the band went back to Australia from that point. They literally thought about quitting, and they couldn't see a way forward. But their friends and their relatives really implored the band. They said, look, this is what Bon would want. He'd want you to continue and move forward. And so they decided a month after Bon's death that they would move forward. And they ended up auditioning and hiring Brian Johnson in late March of 1980. So just over 40 years ago, to become the new lead singer. And within 1 week of him, they handed him a plane ticket. And on April 1st, he was handed a plane ticket. The band in the next week went off to the Bahamas, where they would spend the next 7 weeks recording the next album for AC/DC. Now, they consciously decided that they weren't going to use any of the lyrics from Bon. And so it was a very difficult time with a new lead singer and having to write an entire new album. But they pushed forward. They learned to work together. And at the end of that time, they released, just a few months later, after 7 weeks of recording and mastering it, they released Back in Black. And the reason why the entire album is in black, it's a tribute to Bon and his memory. And now the album got off to a great start. Over the course of the last 40 years, it is, the record's a little spotty, but it's have sold upwards of 50 million albums, which if you look at the all-time lists, some of the all-time lists say it's the second best-selling album of all time. So to me, it's a great metaphor of how this band emerged through a crisis, learned how to work differently, and produced something that was amazing. I think it's a great metaphor for what we're all dealing with right now. Last week was the first in the installment. We launched the Silver Goldfish. This week, we're going to be talking about sales and client success. And you can see every Tuesday through May and June, we'll get together on noon to tackle another element of the employee and the customer experience. Today, though, is all about the Diamond Goldfish, which just came out back in January. And that's all about the idea of how do you excel under pressure and thrive in what we call the game of business. Now, here's the thing: this is the microbe in the room, right? We know that we're all under a great deal of pressure right now. This was a picture that was shared to me. I love this. This is a guy at Costco buying 238 rolls of toilet paper. So we know we're under a little bit of pressure. It really, I think, starts with understanding how our brain works. And with that, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to throw it over to Travis Carson to introduce himself, and he's going to take us through a little bit of how we can best handle pressure.
Controlling it now. Okay, great. Travis Carson here, everybody. A few minutes of your time today to really pick up on what Stan was just talking about, that we obviously want to be very real about the situation that we're in. We're going to talk a little bit about the game of business and how brain science works and what the impact that has on us. And there's just no way to sugarcoat it, that what we're going through right now is raising a level of pressure, whether it's the work from home, managing things that are going on with our families. But one of the things that we like to kind of impart to our clients is this too shall pass. And there's an element now of challenging all of us to be our best selves through what isn't just normal business pressure. And so we love this quote, that the point of the mountain is how well you get over it. And I think all of us right now are being challenged in that way. So as we go through this discussion today, we're going to try to be very real about the COVID situation, but also take it back to, as Stan was saying, so that when we come out, we have a little bit of a better understanding of ourselves and a little bit more empathy for what happens to other people when there's pressure in the environment. So with that, I'm going to take you through a little bit of brain science. So the idea here is that a little bit of an understanding of brain science can be helpful even in the best of times in business. And right now, it can be very helpful to just get an appreciation for what's going on at a heightened level for all of us. And so, and Stan, you may have to click through because I don't seem to have the buttons on the bottom left. Okay. There we go. Now I have them. Nope, apologies. Now I have them. So what we want to do is just take you through a little bit of a view, again, on the brain science. So, and if any of you want to jump in on chat, if you have some background on this or questions, feel free at any time to jump in. But here's the bit that we know. Done some study with a neuroscientist out of UC Davis, University of California at Davis. And it's kind of interesting to just know that our brains develop in 3 phases. So the first part of brain development is this thing in the middle here called your amygdala reptilian complex. And the idea of the reptilian complex, its only job is to look around our world for risk. Now, what's important to appreciate about the reptilian complex is it doesn't have language, doesn't have rational thought. Its only job is to look for risky situations. The neuroscientist that we worked with actually calls it a human highlighter, meaning that it's highlighting your world, looking for anything that looks risky. And what's important to understand about it is it's like electricity. It's either on or off. There's no dimmer switch either. So it's not kind of on and kind of off. It's either triggered or not triggered. And that becomes really important because the second part of our brains to develop is what's called our limbic system. Limbic system does a lot of things. A couple of things that it does is it houses emotions. Emotions are also non-linguistic. So emotions are a big part of being human, but it's important to appreciate there's not rational thought inside the emotions. So two parts of our brain, non-linguistic. Really important to understand when the pressure hits. The other thing that your limbic system does is it controls bodily functions. So things like dilation of pupils, heart rate, sweat glands, all of those things are controlled through your limbic system. And your reptilian complex has a direct connect to your limbic system, meaning that when it's triggered, lights up your body. Third part of our brains develop is the most unique part of the human brain, called the neocortex. This is where we have language, we develop language, and of course, reasoning, rational thought, business, poetry, science, sports. All of the rest are coming out of the neocortex. It's also the part of the brain we understand the least. This is why, 20 years ago, we had things like you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and now we have all these things in neuroscience coming out about neuroplasticity, and you can rewire the brain, which is a big part of what we're talking to you all about today in terms of helping rewire ourselves for how we behave under pressure. But here's what's really important to appreciate about the pressurized environment, is that when pressure hits, certain drugs starts to hit our brain. So this isn't even like a psychology conversation or choices that are being made. This is a biology conversation about what happens to us when the pressure hits the environment. First drug to hit our brains is actually called serotonin, and it hits our neocortex. Serotonin is a numbness drug, and it's a happiness drug. So it takes the highest level processor of being a human being when there's pressure in the environment and kind of says to that part of our brain, why don't you go sit on the sidelines and just kind of chill out and be numb and be happy? Simultaneously, the reptilian complex gets two drugs. It gets adrenaline and dopamine. Most of us know what adrenaline is. It's speed. If you don't know, what dopamine does is it lowers inhibitions. And so if you just look logically at that drug combo, when there's pressure in the environment, the most primitive part of our brains are being told to do whatever you want, dopamine, as fast as you can, adrenaline, to save your life. And then what it does is it lights up your body. And so this is, for people who do a lot of work with us over time, what they get really good at is using their body as almost a vessel that once you feel triggered, whether it is flop sweat, locking your jaw. I had somebody once tell me their ears get hot, which I think is weird because I can't even feel my ears. But the idea is if you can get in touch with what's happening in your body when there's pressure in the environment, you have a chance to intervene in the process. Stan, oh, there it goes. Okay. So most important thing that we're probably going to show you over this period of time is an element of perspective, which is a big part of what Stan was introducing us to in the beginning, that when you have this appreciation for what happens to the human brain under pressure, it's also important to begin to appreciate that humans are the only species on the planet dealing in two types of pressure. Now, God forbid, if you've ever been in a life or death situation, your body is a big reason that you are still in the gene pool. Now, generally speaking, COVID is creating a little bit of an interesting situation here, but generally speaking, human beings have gotten life and death figured out. Like we have houses, we have clothes, we have medicine, we'll get a vaccine at some point on COVID and all this stuff. So what human beings have done, because we do this all the time, we invented a game. And as Stan was talking about earlier, that game is called business. And our claim is in the game of business, all that is truly at stake is your identity. Or map it over this situation that we were just going through. When the technology stops working, like the reason that people get flustered, that I get flustered in that moment, is you start worrying about your identity. That's what human beings have done. And the social evidence on that is the number one fear across the world is, of course, public speaking, which is an identity risk. It's not an actual risk. But tell that to your body. In the absence of awareness, human beings are making no differentiation in terms of how they respond to risk. We start developing habits to protect our identities as if our lives are at stake. Now, the example that I've been sharing on this over time is that habits are things that your body does with no neocortex involved. So it's something you do repetitively and unconsciously. So if you've ever been in a meeting, or in this case, a Zoom call, and you say or do something and somebody later says, I can't believe you did that, or I can't believe you said that, and you're like, I had no recollection of that, that's your body taking over your mind. Now, typically, the only time that we really become conscious of the habits we have in this game of business is when something very traumatic happens. Like for me, back 5-6 months ago, a good buddy of mine from high school died in a plane crash out in Enid, Oklahoma. And I'd had a rough day, and it's like I'm all caught up in that. And then I get a call from another friend of mine who tells me that Matt had passed away. And it's like that rush of perspective in the moment that helps us realize that this is just an identity game. So if we can reintroduce that perspective, and Tony will be talking a little bit more about the how on this, but what we wanted to anchor before we look at the how to do it in the game of business is to kind of look at the fight or flight mechanism in the world. Since every species on the planet has an amygdala, it's important to start to appreciate that there appear to be 4 primary responses in nature. So there's a fight and flight, which we're all more familiar with. Internal and external just means, do you kind of stuff it down, which would be more internal, or are you more overt, which means you start pushing out? As we start to fill this in, it'll make more sense. But there appear to be 4 primary survival strategies in nature. The first one is to fight the environment externally. We call it a dictate strategy. You think about a rhinoceros. They don't have language, but they do have a big horn, and every time there's pressure in their environment, they charge against the pressure. The second strategy in nature is to flee the environment. We call it a migrate strategy, so birds got wings, so they can move away from the danger very quickly. The third strategy in nature appears to be to fight the environment, but not leave it physically. So you think about a bison standing in the middle of the Midwest of the United States when it's snowing. They don't go anywhere. They just pound at the ground looking for that last blade of grass. So they tolerate the environment. They got a heavy winter coat that helps them do it. Final strategy in nature is to flee the environment, to flee it more mentally, but stay physically. So that's like a tortoise going back into its shell, or a bear with its digestive system. So they hibernate from the environment. 2 things important to appreciate here. Other species got a physical manifestation of their survival strategy. Okay, humans did not get wings or horns or shells or anything like that. So we're a little bit harder to identify, which is why you have to look through the lens of pressure. And then the second thing is that human beings, because we have a neocortex and we have language and we try to understand our environment, use rational thought, sometimes what we do is we inject biology with intent. So a bison doesn't sit around and go, I don't like the birds because every time winter comes, they leave. Human beings are the only species that start going, I don't like how that person's responding to the pressure because they're not doing it how I would do it. And this tends to cause a lot of the interpersonal breakdowns that Tony will be addressing in a couple of minutes. Okay, so 4 survival strategies in nature. Some of you might be sitting there going, I don't think so. What we wanted to do, but COVID kind of didn't make this possible, is we were going to get you all together and put you on a boat, and then we were going to sink the boat, okay, because we're that kind of awful people. But if we had done that, you wouldn't need to take our little style indicator. There wouldn't be a whole lot of like thought that would have to go into, well, what style am I, or what strategy do I have? Stan, Tony, and I would have just gotten on our little dinghy, and we would have, gotten out our iPhones and videotaped all of you. And some of you probably would have jumped up and started telling everybody what to do. Like, hey, get to the back of the boat. It's the only way to balance out the weight. Some of you would have grabbed some of the tasks that are being presumably, laid out, grabbed some of those tasks and started tolerating them and hammering them out. A few of us would have kind of pulled back and started running some analytics on whether or not we were going to live or die. Are we bailing more water than we're taking on? And then presumably a few of you would have jumped out of the boat and said, you're going to go swim for help. We would have gone, that a-hole's not coming back, okay? And it would have just happened. It would have been instinctual. It would have been the best chance you have to save your life. So there's no rank order here. It's not a thinking process. It's not psychology. It's biology. And so as Tony starts walking us through here in a couple of minutes, ways to observe this in ourselves and think about it in others, that's kind of what we're going for, folks, is that we do claim this is a hardwire, that this is your biology, but it's not all of who you are. You have a neocortex. And so a big part of upgrading away from these hardwire responses is learning to tell ourselves that under pressure, we're not going to die. And literally, many of our clients begin to do that. It teaches our amygdala, our reptilian complex, not to trigger, and starts to allow people to be more flexible when the pressure hits in the environment. So the map over to people looks like this. If you look from left to right, we've got the biology on the far left. The middle 2 columns are the neocortex trying to make sense of what has us feel pressure. And then at the far right is what we try to solve for in this game of business. So for people who dictate under pressure, what they'll tell you is, I don't understand where things are going. And the less certainty they have, their body gets fired up. And the only way to try to calm it down is to try to control the environment by getting more aggressive and telling people what to do. For people who migrate under pressure, they want freedom, they want flexibility, they want options, they want to be able to move around. They like to influence the environment by getting people excited about things and then moving to the next. For people who tolerate under pressure, what they would tell you is just keep things stable, don't rock the boat, let's just power through and we'll generate results. And certain other people, the hibernate strategy, don't take these things to extreme, but what people who hibernate will tell you is, hey, I need more information, I need to be an authority on the topic before I make a decision. And the last thing before I start turning it over to Tony here is just factor in COVID, folks. There's no certainty as to when this period of time is going to be over. There's no freedom, as many of us have been, quarantined, stay at home. Stability, work from home is creating all kinds of issues there. I don't have like a stable work environment. Security, job, what's going to happen? Look at unemployment rates. So on top of just normal business pressure, all of us are being triggered even more by what's happening in the environment, which again goes back to what Stan was saying, is we want to be real about that stuff. And as I wrap up now, this is where maybe the greatest quote of all time comes from Viktor Frankl, that as we are all in some weird way, like universally around the world, being faced with the same challenge through COVID, so we all are facing a very similar stimulus, which doesn't happen typically. There is a space between the stimulus and response. And that's where we want people to really have that power to choose. So that's what we are going for, folks. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tony Cooper, who's going to talk to you a little bit about how to start applying this material to yourself and in your work with other people.
Great. Thanks, Travis. Thanks, Stan. And thanks, everybody, for attending. I just introduced myself really briefly. Work with Travis. We're business partners and the CEO of Market Force. And the thing I really love the most about what we're talking about here is when our clients really grasp the idea that we're playing a game, that this isn't life or death, and that allows them to play at a really high level and allows them to really just become the best versions of themselves, not, with each other in their businesses, but also in their homes and with their families, where a lot of this really matters. So, that's just really what we do at Market Force and what I really love about the work. What I wanted to talk through is just referencing that Viktor Frankl quote that Travis just shared, which is really intended to empower us to be able to choose our responses rather than just automatically reacting to this pressure. And what it really requires, if you remember the pressure model that we had on, is the ability to distinguish between the actual pressure that would cause a threat to your life and the normal identity risk that we struggle with every day in the game of business. And when you have that perspective, you'll be able to manage yourself well under pressure. And that is the intent of Market Force, is to be able to perform that. So I want to run through here briefly the 4 different styles that Travis laid out, and then look at what their natural reactions would be under pressure without awareness. But if they can remember that they're playing a game and that the goal is to build identity by being useful and valuable to the people that surround them, how they could actually choose their response. So hopefully at this point, perhaps you've recognized yourself in one of these styles. So we're going to ask you when we get to the Q&C to share some of your personal experiences around this. So just really curious as you're listening, just really where can you see yourself or maybe others around you in some of the automatic reactions? And then also, when have you been able to overcome that natural response and then, natural reaction, and then choose a response that was more effective? And a lot of us, as we go through our careers, we learn more and more what is ineffective and what is more effective. So if we look at the first style, that's going to be the control style. That was the rhino. So when the rhinoceros doesn't like their environment, what they do is they charge right at the environment and they try to control it. They want to dictate, they want to dominate the environment so that it can return to something that's more conducive to how they like. So if you're that particular style, the way to manage your biology is to notice that when you feel a lot of pressure, what you're looking to do is be right in the situation. You're trying to make a point. You're trying to get other people to understand because you're trying to drive that certainty. Right? You're looking to have everyone else buy into the thing that's going to make you feel more secure and certain. But in reality, what we notice, if you looked around, is that's not what they're going through, and that your reaction is actually causing more pressure for them. So what we ask you to do is, if you're going to choose your response, is to learn to prioritize relationships you have over your own principles by simply asking yourself, what do other people need? By looking up off of your own concerns and start to understand what they need. And so that's really the first one in managing your reaction. And you see, you have to put your own needs aside before you can start driving your relationships with others. So the influence people, they're the ones who, when there's a lot of pressure, they want to move away from that. They will migrate away. They'll also avoid things that are difficult or painful. And so they're also very impatient. So they do it really quickly. And so in managing influences biology is noticing one of the ways that influences will migrate is that they easily get distracted. Shiny objects and other things like that feel more comfortable to them. They'll migrate away from the pressure and they'll migrate to something else that feels better. They don't even have to leave the room. They could just start picking up another conversation. They'll also wind up starting to talk. That's one of the ways that influencers will manage their own biology, is they'll start to talk and kind of meander a little bit. Other people in the room are trying to follow what they're talking about. And it's noticing that other people are getting lost in your story is actually causing more pressure for people around. So the response that influencers can choose is to stay focused and stay disciplined on what they said they would do. So oftentimes they can even migrate away from their own promises, which is really going to start degrading the relationships they have with other people. The third style is the power style, the bison that tolerates the environment, that figures, hey, it'll be spring at some point. Their strategy is to outlast everyone else, outwork everyone else. And so when things aren't working for powers, they tend to just put their heads down and work a lot harder. And so the thing to manage on your own is to realize that just being busy doing something isn't necessarily reducing the pressure in the environment. It might make you feel better, but everyone else notices that what's really important isn't being what's taken care of. And so that's really the opportunity, is to get past your own biology and start to look around and figure out what's the most important thing to everyone else. And can you really dig in, use that great that discipline to get work done, and dig in on delivering things that are really important to everyone else, because that's ultimately what's going to reduce the pressure that other people feel. Final style I'll walk through is the authority style, and that's the hibernate one, the one that retracts and spends time with itself, thinking about what the right way to do things is. It interestingly has, so the need for security comes up, and as Travis mentioned, I think that's one of the things that, one of the business concerns that we all have right now that none of us are really connected to. Of course, certainty and freedom and stability are all messed up, but security, we really don't know where this is going. We don't know where this is headed. None of us has been through this before. So there's absolutely no security in terms of how this is going to wind up. And we're all making it up as we go along. And I believe for authority people, that causes the biggest pressure and really has them hibernate on what's working and what's not working. And if an authority person isn't careful, what they'll start focusing on is pointing out all the things that are not working. And so that's going to show up like criticism, and it's going to feel, it's going to cause other people to want to pull away from authority. So authorities, if they start to choose their own response, they want to start overcoming the need to slow things down and hibernate, but actually start to push things back into motion. So moving faster than what they typically will feel comfortable, that's going to feel better to the people around them. And if they can take all that great analysis and understanding of what's not working, but start turning it into opportunities and focusing on the future so that other people can start to see, to be the benefit of their analysis, that's when they can start really developing stronger relationships. So the really key here in each one of these, and hopefully you're relating to your own version of it, or maybe you notice people you work with, you start to see that once the pressure hits, it's really difficult to manage your biology if you're not able to distinguish the difference between what constitutes a genuine threat to your life and what thing is only going to put your identity at risk. And so in each of these situations, you can see that the breakthrough actually happens when each style makes other people's needs more important than their own. And so I'm going to finish up with this quote that I think sums up a lot of what we all probably have experienced very well. I think what's important to notice is the man who said this, John Ross, is the richest person in modern history. And you'd think when he was talking about how to make money, you'd talk about industry or leverage or distribution. But his point was that the ability to deal with people is the most valuable asset you can have in a game of business. And what's really required is your ability to take the attention off of you, off of your own need, to be able to distinguish in the environment what's working and what's not working, and be able to help other people be more successful. So I'll turn this over to Stan, who's going to walk us through the actual application of the diamond rule.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Tony. Really quick I'm hoping as you heard those 4 different styles that one of them resonated with you, and a little bit of sharing. I am an off the chart influence. Tony, you want to share your style?
My style is the control style.
The control. And Travis?
I am an authority.
Great. And I think Sal's muted, but I want to say I think he's a power, so that rounds out the 4 right there. But in the book, we talk about this concept of thriving in business, in the game of business, and essentially excelling at what we call the 4.0 version of winning. And so if the 4.0 version of winning is the diamond rule, obviously there's got to be a 1.0, a 2.0, and a 3.0. So I want to take you through all the way to the 4.0, and we're going to start with the 1.0. And that's the silver rule. And I wasn't aware of the silver rule until about a year ago, but it dates all the way back to the time of Confucius. And it's simply this: what I wish others not to do onto me, I also wish not to do onto others. And if you boil it down, the silver rule is just 3 words: do no harm. Like, just don't do bad stuff. And so it's actually not a bad place to start. In fact, Google's entire central code of conduct for almost its first 20 years was don't be evil, which is literally the silver rule applied. We like the silver rule. We talk about the silver rule as being kind of foundational. It's not a bad place to start. The problem, though, it really doesn't tell you what to do. It only simply tells you what not to do. Now, the 2.0 builds upon the silver rule, and the 2.0 is actually found in every culture and every religion. The 2.0 is the golden rule. And I can imagine everybody on this webinar is familiar with the golden rule. In fact, Marriott Hotels has an entire advertising campaign built around the golden rule right now. And if we've all learned it, it's simply this: treat others the way that you would like to get treated, right? So good and bad, how you want to be treated yourself, that's how you would simply treat others. Now this, it's not a bad place to start. In fact, it's a great learning tool for children. But we believe for business that the golden rule is a bad rule, because it makes a very flawed assumption that what you would like is also what everyone else would like. And as Travis and Tony said, there's 4 predominant styles. It's better that it builds on the silver rule, but it tends to be more inward. And when you're only focusing on yourself, you're going to have only a 1 in 4 chance of connecting with other people, right? How you would want to treat yourself may be fine with somebody who has your same behavioral style, but for 3 out of 4 people, it's going to be a miss. The 3.0 builds upon the golden rule. It takes it one step further. The platinum rule is grounded more in emotional intelligence. And the platinum rule is simply this: treat others the way that they would like to be treated. So instead of, for example, if I was dealing with Tony, instead of treating Tony the way that Stan would want to get treated, this is more outward, and then I figure out what Tony's needs are, and then I simply give it to Tony. So this is an improvement on the golden rule. Again, it's more grounded in emotional intelligence, more outward. The challenge, though, that we have when we live by the platinum rule is that many times we can be in an interaction and we lose a sense of ourself because we're so much focused on the other person, and we're not maybe paying attention to ourselves, and we might get triggered, which may affect how we behave. And so we talk about the idea of the platinum rule as a great plan, but in the immortal words of Mike Tyson, right? Everyone has a plan until what happens? Till they get punched in the face. So the next level up from platinum combines both the best elements of the golden rule and the platinum rule together. It's the diamond rule. And the diamond rule is simply this. The diamond rule is the ability to manage yourself under pressure, right? Which then allows you to focus on the other person and addressing their needs to avoid their triggers. And it's, like we said, it combines a little bit of the best of both the golden rule and the platinum rule. Because the first part is this idea of neutralizing your own style and managing your triggers, which then allows you to focus on the other person and empathize and move things further. Now, just in a second, we're going to open up to questions and comments really quickly. We've got a gift for everybody at the end, which is awesome. And there's also going to be an ability for you to take a style indicator assessment to be able to answer a group of questions to actually figure out your own behavioral style. This last quote, though, it's a little bit of an improv of an Andre Agassi quote about tennis and business, and I've modified it to really sum up what we've covered today. And it's this idea that excellence under pressure is the ability or the empathy to perceive all that's around you. And the more that you can understand what the concerns are through other people's styles, to look at it through their lens, the more you can thrive under pressure and solve for people in both life and in business. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions and comments. So feel free, there's a Q&A button in the chat. Feel free to go in there and ask a question. But I'm going to open it up by throwing it over to Travis. You've worked within this market force framework for over 2 decades. You've done thousands of trainings. What's the biggest question that you always get asked almost every training?
Well, typically, what people want to know is, can I be a combination of multiple styles? It's probably the most frequently asked question, Stan. And the answer to that question is, like, for example, if you take our style indicator, you'll get a distribution of different styles. And so somebody who tests is like a 10 on an influence like Stan versus somebody who's like a 6-6 tie between influence and power. But what people want to know in that moment is, well, does that mean that, I'm only one style? And we mentioned this throughout, folks. We are not saying that your style is all of who you are. So it's more about who you are under pressure. We all have been influenced by parents and coaches and mentors and teachers. nature, nurture, where does one start, where does one end? These are great questions. What we find is your style really begins to show when the pressure ticks up. So everybody has some distribution of different styles in them, but then the pressure hits and we start trending back towards one. And so a lot of people will say, well, I feel like I can move around. And what our response to that is, that's what we want. Unfortunately, what we see too often, Stan, is people think they're doing that, but then the pressure hits, then they drop back into their default patterns and they don't have any idea that that's actually damaging their identity over time.
All right, great. We've got a question from Kimberly. What do you think about doing an exercise with a client to ID their style and figure out how to best work with them? Maybe, Tony, do you want to talk a little bit about mindset and how to identify?
Yeah. So the one thing to know about identifying is that people without awareness don't even know they're broadcasting their style. And so one of the things that we spend a lot of time with our clients doing is training. And if you read the book, if you read the Diamond Goldfish book, it lays out a lot of different characteristics that become very identifiable once you start to know what to look for. One of the tricky parts is that we tend to try to figure out which one of 4 styles they are. And so also what you'll see in the book is there's a way of looking at it we call 50-50s, in which we actually divide the map in half and we group characteristics of 2 styles at a time. And when you overlay these 2 maps, which will show up like this on the circular map, and you ask yourself simply 2 questions, are they more like this? Are they more like that? And you can overlay them. It actually helps you identify in a very quick order what those are. I'll walk through them without a whole bunch of explanation, but people tend to be either more offensive in nature, meaning they like to start things, they like to generate things, they're brainstormers, they like to get things going. They're not so much more interested in how it turns out. Other people are more defensive in nature. They don't like to be engaged in hypothetical conversations. They just want to dig into what's actually the work that's got to get done, and then they want to do it well. So that's a distinction between offense and defense, and that cuts the map in half. Controls and influences are the offensive players. Powers and authorities are the defensive players. Now, if I were to flip it the other way, half the time when we're building trust with each other, we're looking to build trust from a competence perspective. So I want to know how skilled you are, how much can I rely on your abilities, versus how much do I trust you as a person? What are the human qualities or characteristics that make me feel like you're very trustworthy? And when split the map in half the other way, controls and authorities tend to be the competence-based and the trust building, and powers and influences tend to be the sincerity-based one. So those are 2 different overlays. And if you just run through that exercise in your head, it gives you an idea of what their style might be and a way to take an initial approach with them.
Really good. The one thing I'll add, because that's all awesome, is ask open-ended questions. And people a lot want to know, I'm not saying you were asking this, but people want to know what's the magic bullet. There just isn't a magic bullet question. There's just magic bullet answers. And so like you were asking about clients, the other place that we see this come up a lot is with in hiring. And one of the questions that we recommend you ask somebody when you're hiring them is just ask them to tell you something that they're really proud of from their career. And in a lot of ways, to Tony's point, an offensive player will talk about something net new they did for the company, and a defensive player will talk to you more about something they persevered on to get done against impossible circumstances. And is that determinative? No, but it's getting you into this mindset, to Tony's point, of like starting to think about what's the concern with the other person.
Great.
So open-ended questions are a great way or a great tool to utilize for that.
Yeah. And I know we talk about in the book the idea of looking as well as listening.
Correct.
Because the physical environment, how they handle themselves, can also speak a little bit to their style. We've got a question from...
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So we had a question from Alan Roy. I seem to handle major issues better than smaller problems. Is there a way to refocus so I can handle small issues better?
I'll take a stab. No idea exactly that, but perhaps it's easier for you, Alan, to have the perspective when it's larger. When you can see the business concern, it might be easier for you to be able to distinguish between the two different kinds of pressures, which would give you a lot more resourcefulness to be able to respond appropriately. When maybe the smaller ones, they're like below your consciousness level, and so maybe they just show up a little more like easier to irritate you or something, and so it's easier to get dropped into your style. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the first thought I had in your situation.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add, Alan, is you may want to take the style indicator, because a lot of it would be kind of fun to kind of map that into your style. I have seen, and just from what you wrote there in your question, Alan, and I'm not saying that we're right, but that could be a power response. See, a lot of times when powers have a lot of stuff that they need to stabilize, it actually calms them down because there's a lot to do. Whereas if it's a minor thing, they can actually feel kind of triggered because it's not enough to do. So there could even be a correlation to what your core style is about how you're handling that situation. So we'd love for you to take the indicator, follow up with us on it, because that's a really interesting question, and a great way that we like to use this material is to investigate issues just like that.
Great. And again, at the end, we're going to give everybody a code so they can go to diamondgoldfish.com and be able to take a free indicator, which is a $25 value. One last thing, I think, for Alan, and shout out to my neighbor in South Carolina, Alan. I think it's also, you got to pay attention to your own biology, and maybe think back to the times where these little things triggered you, to start to be aware when these little things start to catch up on you, to be able to take that step back and be able to have that awareness. This question's from Mark Villalobos from Illinois. COVID is all about uncertainty, and it's unprecedented. People's styles impacted by the types of pressure that they find themselves under.
It's such a great question, Mark. And again, we don't want to position this like we have the answer, but our experience is no. And that's actually kind of the issue. So what we would say about COVID is that you're going to see people's styles more frequently. See, if we map this back to business, one of the other questions, Mark, that we get that kind of maps to this is people go, well, look, I'm not relating to this. I react fine under pressure. And what we always want people to do, Stan was just saying it there, is maybe even go back to earlier in your career. Because you think about somebody who's very new to business, they're going to feel a lot of pressure kind of at this point, earlier in the process. And then they start learning over time. Those same things don't cause them to feel as much pressure. So maybe they don't feel pressure until way up here. And so what we want to do is get the pressure threshold so high so that people are not feeling it, so quickly triggered. Now, something like COVID is going to have most of us triggered to start the day. Whereas before, you might wake up and get a workout in, and then you go in and then boom, you get that email that causes pressure, and then you're triggered. A lot of what's going on, Mark, is everybody's fuse is a little shorter because everybody's already triggered with the lack of certainty, lack of freedom, lack of stability, lack of security, as Tony was saying. And so you're going to typically, I think, see right now people with shorter fuses. You won't see different styles. You'll actually see their styles manifesting quicker.
Right. Great. We got a question from the chat. It says, it seems like people are promoted by their ability to manage up, and those tend to be inflexible regarding style. What's the best way to deal with that kind of leader?
Well, this is a great question, and might even start pushing into the game a little bit. We characterize the game of business as a sport, that there are certain elements of this sport which are more economic, your ability to produce results, and political, your ability to manage relationships around you, in many cases managing up. I just came off a call with an executive who's talking about doesn't like to manage up, but he's got to learn to manage up. So maybe the first thing we'd say is it is a part of the game. So like if I was a tennis coach and somebody came to me and said, I don't like hitting backhands, I'd go, well, I'm going to have to hit some backhands if we're going to win some tournaments. So politics is part of the game. Okay. Now, what we don't like to see is when somebody turns the entire game of business into politics. I think that's when it becomes frustrating for many of us. And, you know, short answer to this question, what we would say is you got to do a little bit of politics in order to remain economic in this game. And so to do zero politics usually means that people are coming after you or somebody might get upset at you. So we would invite you to find a way to be ambitious about engaging in some politics, but just don't make it the sole purpose of the game. And we will acknowledge that this is a tough situation. What you could do, like using the styles model here as well, is try to think about the style of the leader that you're struggling with. And as you think about what their style is, you might become somebody that can politically address their concerns, relieve pressure for that person, and that helps your own promotability in that situation. So I don't know if that was helpful or makes it worse.
No, that's helpful. I think what he was getting at, people that do a great job of kissing up and then they kick down, right?
Yeah.
So I do think that there's always a challenge. I think if you can understand the things that trigger that person, and to your point, Travis, if you can start to alleviate some of those things while they're concerns, as opposed to rising to the level of problems. You know, one of the things I just want to share that I really like from the book that we created is what's called the Diamond Rule Matrix. And so assuming you go and take the indicator, you have the ability to figure out that you're going to be in one of these 4 columns. You're either a control, an influence, a power, or an authority. What's great is you can come down here on the left-hand side, and it's going to give you kind of advice of how to best deal with each of the other styles, including your own style, given the different element or stage within the relationship. So whether it goes all the way from prospecting all the way through to client management. And I think this is a great kind of resource tool as you get more familiar with the styles. We've got just about a few minutes left. Tony, anything you want to add there regarding that question?
Well, it sounds like this is not a person that's playing business at a high level. And so that's a lot of the challenge is when you elevate your game and learn how to play identity and learn how to work with others and promote them and be a solution to their concerns, you'll run into people who don't play that game. It's really important for you to identify them because they're not going to be playing the game back. They're going to be more takers than givers. And it's really important to distinguish them. One of the ways that I like to think of people like that is I like to think of them as their loaded weapons. So they're dangerous, but they're less dangerous when they're close to me, pointed away from me. So I tend to like to build identity with them to neutralize how our relationship, so that where there's negative relationships where people are resentful and fighting against them, they're actually going to take fire from that person, and I would rather stay out of the way. So it's not a 4.0 level of playing the game, but you don't get to play the game with 4.0 people all the time, and these are circumstances where you still can play the game at a high level, just not with people who are.
Right. I think also that these types of leaders know what the triggers are for the people that they work with, and they're masters at the ability to trigger other people. And I think for you to be able to kind of step back and just clear your head so you don't do anything just reactionary is a huge benefit. One of my former mentors, a great tennis coach, told me, he said, Stan, he said, never wrestle with pigs in the mud. He said, you'll only get dirty and they enjoy it.
Yeah. Stan, there's one more question that came up. It was a great question from Kimberly. And her question was, does gender come into play in terms of style? It's a really good question. There's a lot of conversation about gender and how gender works and diversity and inclusion in the workplace. To the best of our knowledge, and we already have tens of thousands of results online from our indicator is we see absolutely no correlation between gender or age or ethnicity, that somehow that styles is actually just a purely biological human condition, and it breaks in lots of different ways, but it does not break culturally, gender-wise. And so it's an interesting thing just from how do we neutralize the game of business. Styles is definitely one of the ways to do it because it's just a survival-based biological mechanism.
Great. We've got 2 minutes left. I mentioned we've got a gift, and I want to make sure everybody gets the link and the code to be able to do their own style indicator. First off, a gift for everyone. This just launched last week. So if you were on the webinar last week, you saw us launch Silver Goldfish, which is about the idea of coming across loud and clear, how to deliver a memorable business presentation. So you can go on Amazon today. It's free until midnight out on the West Coast. So feel free to go and download that for free. It's the ebook, Silver Goldfish. And then if you get a chance, go to diamondgoldfish.com and you're going to hit the redeem button, and it's going to ask you for a code, and you're going to put the code in P as in Paul, N as in Nancy, 3, F as in Frank, M as in Mary, the number 8, Y as in yellow, K as in kite, PN3FM8YK. You're going to hit the verify button. It will simply ask you to put your email address in there. It will email you a link, assuming you give it a good email address. It will email you a link. You want to just take them through, Tony or Travis, the quick, maybe how long it will take for somebody to do the assessment?
Sure. 10 minutes, 23 questions, either or questions. Go off your instinctual response. Try not to be the higher evolved version of yourself. See if you can identify that base level biology that we've been talking about.
Great. And I want to thank everyone. We're right at the top of the hour. On behalf of Travis and Tony and me, Stan Phelps, want to thank everyone for spending a little bit of time with us. We hope we've given you some useful tools as you excel in this, and we try to thrive in this very difficult environment. Last words, Travis or Tony?
Nope. Just thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thank you.